And then this final session before we go to closing is just an update on what the new risk networks, so the new risk networks from the Northwest, the North Central, and the Pacific Islands have been up to over this last year. So we're going to start in the Northwest, and I'm going to hand it over to Kathryn Braddock to tell us what they've been up to.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. All right, well, hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. This has been a great symposium. I've really enjoyed watching and hearing everyone's talks. As Bethany mentioned, I am part of the Northwest RISC team, advisory team. And I'm just going to give some highlights about the network in 2021 and some things that were accomplished. So the Northwest RISC Network is a partnership of regional agencies and organizations dedicated to helping practitioners address the nexus of climate change and invasive species. So the Northwest RISC Network in particular focuses on exploring on-the-ground management, conservation, research needs, and opportunities that are unique to the Northwest. So this includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, British Columbia, and also considering surrounding states and provinces. So some big highlights for the Northwest RISC Network this past year include a regional survey. So the network released a survey to gather feedback from regional practitioners in the Northwest, particularly on the extent to which they are thinking about the nexus of climate change and invasive species in their work, any emerging policies or practices that may address the goals of reducing climate-related vulnerabilities and invasive species management, as well as needs, opportunities, and limitations faced by practitioners in the region. The network also had their first symposium in the fall. There were about 330 attendees over 2 days. During the symposium, a variety of different topics were covered. There were sessions on the state of science on invasives and climate change, as well as we heard from perspectives from those managing invasives in the Northwest. And part of the symposium was structured around the RAD framework. So case studies that highlighted resisting, accepting, and directing ecological transformation with regards to climate change and invasive species management were highlighted there. The network this year also developed a website and now has a YouTube channel and Twitter. So the documents and recordings from the survey and symposium are available via the website and YouTube. For the last bit of the time I have today, I wanted to talk on some interesting findings from the survey and symposium, particularly related to top priority for climate-informed invasive species management, and then also desired products and activities that survey respondents and participants wanted to see or want to see out of the network moving forward. So respondents were asked to reflect on their priorities for integrated climate change and invasive species management. The highest priority across all respondents were Native community resilience and environmental degradation, with the lowest priorities being sleeper species and biocontrol efficacy. With the symposium, we received feedback on priorities. So these are just a few of the quotes that came from participants, but including working with states to help them better address climate impacts in state wildlife action plans, promoting early detection and control of invasive plants, and species-specific modeling. In terms of desired products and activities, we reached out to the symposium participants and survey respondents to gather feedback on what they would like to see. Majority of respondents indicated that they would like to see additional case studies, targeted guidance on integrated climate change and invasive species management, more workshops and webinars, and peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. And the symposium feedback really echoed a lot of those elements as well. So additional virtual and free events, workshops and networking, case studies, and then also we received a lot of feedback on topics for future events and products for the network as well that people would like to see. So I'm sharing these mainly because the network is using this information and this feedback to really guide the activities and events and products in the next coming year and in the future. So the next steps and goals, the Northwest RISC Network will be kicking off our events in March with a webinar. So there will be more details about that forthcoming, but we will be putting up more information on our Twitter and on the website as well. So at the bottom of the slide, I've included that information. And then the network's also looking to develop products in the future, such as case studies and research summaries as well. And I'd also like to say that if there are any attendees here in the Northwest region that might be interested in the network, or someone who might be interested, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to talk about the network and share information about that as well. Yeah, and then lastly, I would just like to thank the Northwest RISC advisory team and everyone who has participated in the network over the past year. And I'd also like to very quickly just give a shout out and acknowledgement to Rachel Gregg, a founding member of the Northwest RISC team, and she's here to participate in the Q&A for this session, just for her guidance and support in building the network over the year. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. And I would invite all of the folks from the non-Northeast RISCs to put your contact information in the chat. So if anyone amongst our attendees has friends, colleagues in those regions who want to be part of a regular communication from those networks, that's the best way to do it, I think. So next up, I have Chelsea Nagy, who is going to tell us about updates from the North Central RISC Network. Chelsea.
Thanks, Bethany. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Chelsea Nagy from the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm excited to tell you about the North Central RISC. So the North Central RISC just started up in June of this year, and like the other RISCs, our goal is to improve management of invasive species in a changing climate. And so far, we've mostly been working on building out our network. So we're reaching out to stakeholders in the region, including folks from universities, as well as local, state, and federal agencies, tribal nations, and NGOs. And our overall objective is to connect managers and researchers in the region. And some of the specific science objectives include understanding what are the interactions between wildfire, climate, and invasive plants, and what is the potential for ecological transformation. So fires are a reality for the North Central region. We just experienced one of Colorado's most devastating fires, the Marshall Fire, just weeks ago, where nearly 1,000 homes and structures were destroyed. So we encounter the direct and indirect effects of fire throughout a substantial portion of the year. And in fact, as the Marshall Fire showed us, fires can happen at any time of the year. Other aspects of the fire regime are changing too, due to climate change, human ignitions, and other factors. So fire can both be promoted by and promote the expansion of invasive grasses. Grass invasion adds abundant fine fuel to ecosystems that forms almost a continuous kind of carpet of vegetation that can dry out really quickly, making conditions that are more conducive to fire. And additionally, after a fire, these grasses can recover and spread quickly relative to native vegetation. And so together, this is known as the invasive grass fire cycle. A classic example of this that you're probably all aware of is cheatgrass. And in fact, cheatgrass now dominates more than 200,000 square kilometers in the Great Basin region of the US. And here it replaces native shrubland species like sagebrush and salt desert scrub. But cheatgrass is not the only example of a fire-prone invasive grass. Another example is Medusa head, shown here on the left, which is present in Wyoming and Montana. And we know from some of our own research that Medusa head, like cheatgrass, leads to greater fire occurrence and fire frequency in invaded compared to uninvaded areas. And additionally, other plants other than grasses can change fire dynamics too. So on the right is a photo of Scotch broom, which is invasive and promotes fire and extends all the way from the West Coast into Montana. So when managing for invasive grasses, we need to also plan for where they will occur in a changing climate. And we can model where species are likely to remain persistent or even expand into new areas, new ranges, so that we can be more prepared to manage them in the future. So just as an example, we have been in the North Central Risk, we've been diving into some of the data from the Allen and Bradley study in 2016 to get a better sense for where some of the common fire-prone invasive grasses may remain persistent across the 7 North Central states. And these figures here are showing the counties where cheatgrass, Medusa head, and Japanese stiltgrass may remain present through the year 2050 across the 7 states. So in these figures here, the red indicates the presence and the pink or kind of lighter color is absence in this case. So this could be one tool to help counties or states better plan for managing these grasses in the coming decades. And we could also look to where these species ranges might expand to better combat their establishment in the future. So we have results from broad stakeholder surveys in the region that invasives, wildfire, and ecological transformations are some of the key challenges that managers are facing. And we just conducted a survey of our own at the North Central Risk to further refine both the research and management priorities in the region. And so far, like the Northwest, it looks like Native community resilience is very high on people's lists. So we'll be hosting our first workshop in, I believe, April of this year, where we will explore some of the top stakeholder priorities and get to know other members of the North Central Risk a little better. So if you or someone you know is interested in joining the North Central Risk, please send us an email. We can add you to the listserv so you get updates on future events and products. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Chelsea. All right, so our last lightning talk on new risks is Heather Kerkering, who is going to talk to us about the Pacific Island risk. Heather.
Aloha. Are you able to see the screen?
I can see it, but not in presenter mode.
Oh. Is it doing the same thing?
Nope, that looks good.
That's good. Okay. Okay, hi, I'm Heather Kerkering. I'm the science coordinator for the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. I'm here in Oahu, and I know it's late over there on the East Coast, so thanks for hanging on. And I'm here today to represent the Pacific Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, or Pacific RISC. Much like you've heard today from other risk groups, we're comprised of partners across the Pacific Islands who are exploring perspectives, needs, and research at the confluence of invasive species management and climate change. Just to give you a sense of the region that we cover, it is vast. It includes over 2,000 islands, 20 languages, multiple time zones, an international dateline, and both hemispheres. So we do have quite a large region, and I like to point this out to people joining us from the mainland because it's hard to sort of get a sense of how big we are. But we're lucky to be connected by warm and clear waters, and we host sandy beaches, ocean breezes, and beautiful people with a deep connection to our culture and to our environment. And to many, it's paradise. But also, the Pacific Islands are facing devastating impacts from climate change due to increasing droughts, wildfires, water scarcity, coastal flooding and erosion, changes in precipitation, increasing ocean temperatures, and more frequent and intense storms. And we're particularly vulnerable to climate change just because of our exposure and isolation, small size, and sometimes low elevations. The islands are also a paradise for invasive species. For example, although Hawaii is the most remote archipelago on Earth, it hasn't been spared, and the density of non-native species richness by geographic area is much greater here than in any other place in the United States, in the state of Hawaii anyway, not all the Pacific. And we have many concerns looking at the nexus between climate change and invasive species here on the islands, such as native biodiversity and wildlife, agroforestry systems, marine and aquatic, biosecurity, and the loss of native forest and agriculture. The focus on this nexus in the region, though, is not new, and many groups have worked together for over a decade to assess vulnerability of species to a changing climate. Here I'm going to just give a few examples about some of the issues that are going on here, specifically with relationship to invasive species and climate change and bird species, endemic bird species in Hawaii. Hawaii honeycreepers evolved in isolation on the islands. There are over 50 known species, but many have gone extinct. And endemic honeycreepers are susceptible to avian malaria carried by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes were introduced and were non-native in the 1800s. They are limited in their distribution by the cold, but the few birds that remain find refuge in only a few patches of upper elevation forest in cooler, disease-free areas. Let's see. The image on the bottom right that I just put up is actually a range within Maui where 2 honeycreepers are living right now free of mosquitoes and avian malaria. So their their habitat is getting smaller with the increase of mosquitoes into higher elevations. Scientists and managers, though, are taking bold new conservation strategies. One is to release mosquitoes infected with a bacterium that prevents reproduction, decreasing the chances of avian malaria in the upper forest. If successful, it will keep the forest safe for honeycreepers, and it would be the first use of this technique. And recently, Lucas Fortini from USGS developed an avian malaria warning system to help managers start to incorporate the uncertainty of future climates into planning. And already we are sharing these lessons learned across the RISC network. Heading west in a 6 to 7 hour plane ride to Guam, an unincorporated territory of the US, and landing on the other side of the international dateline, where 90% of products are imported. It serves as a major transportation hub between nations and is home to 32 of the most invasive species in the world. The worst is the brown tree snake, introduced in 1952, which has already resulted in the loss of at least 9 native forest bird species. One bold process that conservationists are using and are able to use on the islands is the translocation of species. So what you are seeing here on the left are the Commonwealth of the Northern Mary Islands, which lie just north of Guam. And so they are relocating species to those northern islands in hopes that the brown tree snake will not reach those islands. It hasn't yet. And essentially the Pacific RISC, back to this, aim to do what you've heard a lot of the other RISCs to do too: prioritize lines of research, development management strategies, create a space for engagement and facilitate a network, and promote research and develop effective information strategies. Some of the ways that we've done it in the past are here, just a few examples. We were highlighted, the RISC was highlighted at the IUCN World Conservation Congress with the Pacific delegation. You see that in the upper left. We publish and distribute the results of our work. Really, we just have one so far. That's part of the risk in the center there, based on a survey that we conducted to understand better the needs of our managers in the region. We have a well-attended webinar series highlighting new research and new management strategies. Many of our core team members are technical contributors to the national climate assessments, the past one and the one that's currently being worked on. And we're working with the Micronesia Challenge to set targets for their 2030 invasive species project. That's really, I think I've probably run out of time, but those are a number of different ways to say thank you or mahalo, just to give you a sense of what the Pacific Islands are facing and a little bit about what the RISC is doing. So thank you for the time.
Thanks so much to Kathryn, Chelsea, and Heather for those great presentations and updates on what the other regional RISCs are doing.